We spoke about what is a firewall. And router versus traditional firewall versus the next generation firewall. And we saw which layer of OSI model does a firewall fit in. We had a discussion on that, and we moved forward to talk about packet flow. And few features of Palo Alto, right? And we had a glance on the dashboard GUI. So with respect to this one, we are going to move along and try to do some hands-on configuration today, which will probably not take much time. It's not going to be a 2-hour session, probably, if I'm right, but we'll be covering up what was promised as a part of the agenda. So what all we'll do here, we'll be configuring administrators, and we'll be seeing how to back up and restore configs. And we'll talk about what is config audit and basic internet access to a user and packet capture. So since everything goes hand in hand with each other, I think this basic configuration and packet capture will be done parallelly, and backup and restore will be done parallelly, and administrator and config audit. Config audit is just theory, will not be demonstrating anything there. So I hope 1 hour 15 minutes should be sufficient here. But anyways, we are going to rush over to complete this. We'll be going forward with one topic first and then the other. So let me get to the firewalls to avoid wasting time. I have already powered on the device, and it's ready to get started with the configuration. So we are going to use the same sample lab that I have worked with yesterday. So configuring an administrator. So when I showed you how the dashboard would look like for Palo Alto, we looked at something called device tab, and I told you that the device tab will have all the configuration with respect to the firewall and accessing the firewall. So administrative access, or with respect to firewall, what all configurations you might consider, certificates for the firewall, and authentication, administrator. It's the admin related, management related stuff that you configure, and management interface, backup and restore. There is something called service route, and you configure DNS servers that Palo Altos will use to reach outside itself to internet to get any sort of updates, and to reach updates.paloaltonetworks.com. So all those stuffs which are specific to the firewall will be configured here. So in that versus, when you go to device and setup and go to operations, you have backup and restore, where you see something called configuration management. Under this, you can save and load and export the configuration. So we'll see how to do that. And we'll be first talking about creating an administrator and admin role. So creating an administrator, we already have a super user called admin. And I'll just first talk about the type of administrator, which is dynamic and role-based. So when it's dynamic, you're going to have 4 different types in dynamic, where super user will have access to everything, no restrictions. Super user read only, he can view everything with he will be restricted to configure anything. So he'll not be able to configure anything in here with the read-only permissions. So device administrator, same as super user, but will not be able to review or configure or do any changes with respect to administrator tab that we are currently working on, isn't it? So this and device administrator and super user are going to share same permissions, provided the device administrator will not be able to um, make any changes with respect to administrator or rules, right? So device administrator read only, the same thing. He will not be able to configure anything. I believe so. He will not be able to review or uh, check what's inside the administrator tab. So let's configure a user. Um, I'll say is an audit user, and the password is admin at 123. Okay, so I'm going to say this is this person is going to be having device administrator permissions, and I'm not going to give any password profile. Password profile is nothing but you say how many days the passwords will be valid, and before it asks for a change, how long the password should be. So I'm going to keep it default. So by default, I think it is 8. I'll show you where to check that. So with respect to dynamic, I'm going to demonstrate only device administrator role. So I'm going to click OK. And as I said, we'll be committing the change for it to take effect. So while you do a commit, you have two options here. One being committing your own configuration by the user admin, and committing all configuration. So right now, I know that I am the only person working on this firewall, but in production, you have a team of people and everyone will be working parallelly on the same device. There are chances that you couple of people together without knowing are going to make changes parallelly, and if you got to commit all changes, you will be committing every change that any administrator that any administrator makes here in the firewall. So that's something that you shouldn't do. It's always good to commit your own changes, and you have an option to preview your changes on what you have done. So it says that I have configured under users, and I have configured that is already a user called admin, and there is some configuration for him, and I have configured a user called audit and given some permission, and that's all I've done. Okay, let me close this. And the change summary, again the same thing, it will show you what all you have configured. So it will show you two different lines of config, where running config is the currently committed and active config that is parsed on the firewall. Candidate config is something that it's the configuration that's on the firewall, but it's not yet committed, not yet saved, right? So this is the configuration that's supposed to be saved, and running configuration, there is nothing, no difference yet. So only difference that you have between running and candidate is that we have done some changes on the administrator, right? Okay, so validate commit. So this will tell you if you have done any changes that's going to give any error to the commit. So it won't look good if you actually commit a change and then it says commit failed, right? So it's always good to validate the commit, and if it says commit validated and if it's not going to throw any error here, it's not going to throw any error while you actually commit the change. So this is something that you do for validating the commit before you commit the change. So if it says if it's not going to throw any error here, the commit is going to smoothly complete without any problem. So that's just to avoid false committing. Okay, so let me just try to cancel this and see if it can be canceled. Cannot stop. Okay, so after some extent, you will not be able to stop the commit or any job that runs behind the firewall. So yesterday, if you remember, I showed you the command called show jobs all that's going to run on the firewall. So if I just log into the CLI, and say show jobs all, I should see a commit, or say I should see a validate job, and it says status fin means finished, result is okay. Fin doesn't mean the result is positive. The result should say result should say okay. Then you can be sure that the validation is successful. If it says fin, it means it has completed, but it doesn't mean that it is positive. It is a positive result, right? So preview change, and I have done some validation before the session, so those commits are showing up here. So in this after the session started, we have done a preview change and we have done a validate. Okay, so let us actually commit the change now. So this is all pre-commit that you could do. So here you could give a valid comment that will help you identify out of 1,000 changes that's made on the firewall. You'll be able to identify what is actually going to get committed here. In future, if you got to revert them, you can just go there and check your comment, and you'll be able to identify what changes that. Okay, let me commit the change. While it gets committed, I will tell you a little theory about what is candidate config and the running config. Okay. So if you consider a firewall and a user behind him, and you have internet connectivity, and when a user tries to access something on the internet, you got to configure a couple of things. And let's say you have a policy to allow him access the internet. Policy is there, and you have routing, but you don't have NAT. So which means these two changes are already there on the firewall. That also means that these changes are committed changes. So these committed changes, there is a policy and routing that is required for you to allow access to internet. Of course, let's imagine the interfaces are all configured already. So policy, routing, and NAT are required to be configured, which out of which policy and routing is configured and committed. So this is called running config, same as Cisco. Okay, so the NAT configuration, which is not yet committed but already configured on the firewall. Okay, so this is prior to committing the change. The change is already there, but it's not yet committed. So the non-committed changes are called candidate config. Okay, so that's the only difference that you need to know with respect to what is a running config and what is a candidate config, right? So let's go back to the firewall. The commit should be completed. Yes. So if I log out of the firewall now, and I'm going to log in using the other account that I've created. So since I have provided him the privilege of device administrator, he shouldn't be able to see any configuration on administrator tab, is what I understand. Let's check that. So let me go to device and go to administrator. You see, I don't see that admin username. So ideally I should see a username called admin, and he should be a super user. But since I've logged in using audit username, only that configuration is visible here for me. Okay, and I will not be able to do any changes to this tab as well. I'll not be able to create or modify anything. Okay, that's about device administrator role. If I give device administrator read only, I'll not be able to change anything. So if you see, and if I'm a device administrator role, I'll be able to add a policy or edit a policy. I'll be able to add a NAT policy, or I'll be able to create an interface. So all those stuffs can be done. But only thing is, I'll not be able to view anything on administrator, rather edit anything on the administrator. If it's device,
Quoting the permission.
sorry, can you come again?
Quoting the permission.
Yeah, that's right. So we spoke about 4 admin roles, right? Super user can do anything. You don't have any restrictions. It's like a pseudo user in Ubuntu or any Linux platform. Okay. And you have device administrator, which is the user role that I've logged in with audit username. So this guy will have same permission as this guy, super user, but will not be able to edit anything on administrator tab. Okay. So device administrator read only, he'll not be able to edit anything. He'll not be able to edit any of these policies, objects, network, device. He'll not be able to make any config changes. Device administrator read only. Super user read only, same as device administrator read only. He'll not be able to edit anything. Okay. So basically, if you understand who is a super user and who is a device administrator, the read-only version of those two are the read-only version of super user and device administrator. It's as simple as that. Okay. So let me log out and log in using admin username now. So that's about dynamic user, dynamic administrator type. So when I look at the administrator tab again, you have role-based, something called role-based. Let's check what's that. So that is again pretty simple. So when I go to device, and administrator. So now I see both because I have logged in as an admin username with a super user permission. So I see both. So you see the difference. So earlier I have logged in using audit, who is a device administrator. So with respect to device administrator role, I shouldn't be able to access or view or edit anything with respect to administrator tab. So that's what happened when I logged in using audit username. When I logged in using super user admin, I can do anything I want in the firewall. Right? So let's just edit the audit username again. And I say I'm going to use role-based here. And I already have a pre-built inbuilt profile, 3 profiles here. Let's go check what's that before we configure. So if I go to admin roles, I have 3 of them already. So let me add one. And I say audit. So it's pretty straightforward that if I have a tick mark here, I can view or access this tab, that is the dashboard tab or monitor or ACC tab. So if I say I don't want anything with respect to policies tab to be accessed, if I click again, if it says X, it says disable. So X is disabled here. So if I for whole of the policy tab is disabled, I will not even see policies tab there. So in objects tab, I don't want him to specifically know what's there in, maybe I don't want him to edit addresses tab. Okay, so I say addresses is read only. Address group, application group, service and service group. So everything should be read only. So objects tab should be visible, out of which these 6 parameters shouldn't be editable. It should be read only for him. Policy shouldn't be available. Okay, let's try to check this. So I have to apply this to my administrator. So I go here, I say role based, and I say apply this profile to him. and I commit the change. Okay, so once this is complete, I should be able to, I shouldn't be able to see policies tab for the audit user, and I shouldn't be able to see under objects tab, I shouldn't be able to edit anything for address group, application group, and service group. Okay, let's log out of this. And I'm logging in using Audit. Okay, I guess it's still getting committed. Let me log in using admin and check. So I believe only after it's committed, because since I'm making the change on the administrator that I am going to log in, I'm changing the role over there in the same tab. Maybe it's not allowing me to log in now before it got committed. So let me just try to log in after the commit is complete. So I go to task here. So this is where you check which job is running and what's the status of it. So you go to task here at the bottom and you click, and the commit is now complete. I should be able to log in if I log out now. Yes. Okay, so you see, I don't see any tab called policies right now, right? And under objects and for addresses, I shouldn't have an option to edit anything or add anything here. So, but with respect to tags, I should be able to. Because I haven't restricted anything with respect to tag, I can edit anything for tag, but not for services, or neither for service group nor for application groups as well. Okay, so let me log out. And log in using super user again. Okay, in the agenda, administrator is now complete, and backup and restore and config audit. I have already told you about running config and candidate. Let's just see how do you compare them. Let me try to make some changes, some dummy changes right now. Let me go to the firewall again. And let me try to edit something on objects. I'm just creating a dummy address group, sorry, address object here. I just say okay, so I'm just making some change so that I could demonstrate the config audit stuff for you. So I'm just creating a dummy object, and let me go to device tab. I'm not committing the changes, mind you. I have not yet committed the change that I have just done. So that's supposed to be in which config? Any guesses? So should it be in running config or candidate config? The changes that I have just done.
Candidate.
Right. So it should be as a part of candidate config right now. So all other configs that I see here, the audit user and the role that I have assigned him, everything is a part of running config because it's already committed. But the change that I've just done is a part of candidate config. So let me go to config audit. So this is very useful for you if you got to if you've done some changes, and if you're facing some problem, and you got to revert some change, or if you just wanted to review on which commit it has the changes applied, or after applying which change in which commit you're facing the problem. So it's very useful for you to compare stuff. So you are going to compare, let's say we compare local candidate config with respect to local running config. So let me give the context as 10 and click go. Okay, so running config is this one, and candidate config, as you see, I have done the change of configuring an address name dummy and the IP address of 1.1, and you see who has done the changes, admin user, and with the time and date it gives you on who has done the changes. And there's one more thing that you notice here is that you see that the context or the changes in green, which means it's been added new. So if I've done some edit to that object which is already present, it should show yellow. But if I've deleted something, let's say we have an address object and I have deleted, and that's the change that we are looking at here, it will say red. Okay, so this is how you compare a config. And maybe if you wanted to compare my previous commit, so if you imagine I have done a commit of assigning a role-based administrator type to the user audit. So that was the last commit, right? So let me just compare that to this, and let me say 20 and go. Okay, so when I compare both, it says I have added this one. The only change that has happened after committing the change of assigning a role-based user to the user audit and to that of the current candidate config is that we have added an address. Okay, so we can also compare two commits parallelly. I'm comparing commit 3 and commit 4, which is adding a device administrator role for him to that of role-based admin. So let's see if we see something. You see here. So with respect to commit 3, my permissions are device administrator here. With respect to commit 4, I've given a profile called audit to the user. Right, I've made an edit. So from here, I've made an edit to giving him a role-based administrator, and the role name is audit. So I've edited it from a device administrator to profile audit. Okay, and I have deleted the admin role. Okay, so this is how you compare a configuration to know which commit has done what config in which version. So you can also see the version of the change here, and with the job ID, with the date. I think the version can be checked on the device setup, and while you do a backup and restore, you could check the versions of the firewall commits, and you could just save the version. Okay, so that's about config audit. You go to setup now. We'll just see how do you back up a configuration on the firewall. So if you just go device setup operations, here is what you do with respect to config management and rebooting a firewall, shutting down a device. So shutting down a device, why do you usually do it? You probably would do because let's say you have a power maintenance happening at your location, and it's always a good idea to shut down the device and then do a power maintenance, or else the hardware might go faulty if the power is not maintained in a proper voltage. So it's always a good idea to shut down the firewall prior to the activity, and then carry on with the power maintenance, and then when the power comes back up, the firewall will come back up and you can just verify if the things are okay. So reboot and shut down. And here is where you backup and restore the configuration on your firewall. So first thing you do is save your configuration on the firewall and then export the configuration that is backing up and load the configuration. Okay, so let's say I have done a change of creating an address object, right? So since this is not committed, it's not a part of running config. So let me go to device tab and say I'm saving the named configuration snapshot by name first config. Okay, so this is something that's equal to saving something on your local machine. So if I'm working on the firewall, I'm saving my config on the firewall to the firewall. So this is right now on the firewall's database. Okay, so if I'm exporting it to my own PC where I've logged in. Okay. So I'm going to pick up the configuration that I've saved so far, and it goes down to download it for us. So this is backing up a config. So if you got to load something, you can load it as a configuration version where you must have done 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've done 4 commits so far. So if you got to load the third commit, you have to ignore the 4th commit. You can just load the configuration of the 3rd commit and click OK, and it'll load it. And then you have to commit the changes. Or if you wanted to load the configuration backup that I have just taken, you go to load named configuration snapshot and then click the configuration file and then click OK. So the configuration is being loaded. Check the task manager for status. So when I go back here, I should lose my unsaved or uncommitted config of that object, address object I've created here once the load is complete. So load is complete now. Since it doesn't have much configurations to load, it has completed quickly. So let me reload the page as it is suggested. Okay, so if I go back to see if I have that configuration of that address object that I've created, I shouldn't see them. I still see. Okay.
So what is that difference between this green? It was showing as green. You said
Green.
it was not committed, but it was green. So why would it show green? It should show edited, right?
No, I haven't edited anything, right? So I have created a new object. So why shouldn't it show green? So let's say I have going in, I'm changing an IP here. This is if I do this, it should show yellow because I'm editing something on an already available object. Make sense?
Oh, yeah.
If I'm creating a new object, let's say here, if I'm creating something called object 2, this should show green because I'm creating a new object.
Yeah. So green is anything created first.
Yeah, that's added that's added for the first time.
First time. Okay.
Okay. So, but I don't see a reason why this config is still here because I have taken a backup of the running configuration and I have loaded it onto the firewall. And once it's successfully loaded, my expectation is that this object shouldn't be a part of the configuration yet. But
am I required to log out and log in? I would think so.
Let's try that. But then I don't think so. If it is supposed to work, it should work after I reloaded the page. But let's just check. So if the load required a commit, I should see something that I should have something to commit here. But I don't see anything. So let's try to revert the changes. So I'll also take a chance to show you how to revert your change. So this is the lock I was talking about yesterday. So let's say you're working on something critical and you don't want others to interfere on your configuration and commit something in the middle of your change or something. So you just take a lock and you add a comment saying working on critical migration or something, and take a lock. The people who are working will understand the criticality and maybe not try to commit anything in between. So maybe you can mention and take a lock. So you are a super user, you're taking a lock, and this lock can be removed only by a super user, right? So there's another username called admin2 who has the same super user permissions. He will be able to remove the lock, but if you're working on a mutual in an environment where in the same team, I think he should understand that you're working on something critical, and he will not be able to, or he will not touch or try to change the configuration or commit any changes unnecessarily for that 1 hour of time, since you have mentioned it. So this is how you take a lock and mention people that you're working on something critical, and no one has to interfere at the time that you have mentioned here. Okay, so how do you revert a configuration? So you have an option here, like a folder icon. So you say revert changes. So whatever changes that you have not committed so far will be reverted. So right now I don't have anything to commit, so I don't have anything to revert as well. Okay. But ideally it should show me whatever changes I'm doing here. It should show me as a commit scope, but I don't know, maybe it's not considering this as a configuration since I've loaded it, but still I see them here. Not sure why the reason why it's showing up still here, because when I've loaded the configuration running config back, I shouldn't see this object available here yet, because that's not a saved configuration. It shouldn't be a part of the backup that I've taken. Anyways, so config audit is complete. So let's try to configure a basic internet access for the user who sits behind the firewall, and parallelly try to capture the packet. And I'll show you just how to initiate a packet capture on the firewall here. Okay. So let me just try to mark down what are all the configuration that you need to take care. So the first one would be interfaces. You should configure inside and outside interface properly. And then you should make sure your routing is in place for the user to go outside or the firewall to reach outside. And you need a security policy, a valid policy. You need a NAT policy. That's pretty much it. So let's try to configure this and see if we can achieve internet access for the user inside. So let's first configure the interface. So if you see the topology, I have Ethernet 1/1 towards the user and 1/2 towards the ISP. So ISP is the management cloud again, that's connected to my own local computer, and the gateway that's going to provide the IP to the 1/2 is the same gateway that I have logged in as logged into the EVNG. So it's 172.16.24.1. So let me go to the firewall and Ethernet 1/1, and I first need to choose the type of the interface. So in our case, it is layer 3. So do not worry about other types of interfaces. We'll just see them in brief later on as the course progresses. Virtual router, it's similar to VRF in Cisco terms. So since like you have a default VRF default routing table in a Cisco router or a firewall, similarly you have a default virtual router in Palo Alto. So if you need to create one separately, you can do so. So zone. So I have mentioned already that the firewall is a zone-based firewall where each interface should be mapped to a specific zone, and you should reference the zone when you try to add a security policy. So it's just a name given to the firewall. It's a process of grouping multiple minded interfaces or VLANs or networks together to use them in a single policy. So let's say you have 4 VLANs, and if you don't have a concept of zones, so if you write a security policy based on interfaces with source interface, destination interface, you had to write one policy per interface or per network. So if you have a zone, let's say you have Wi-Fi VLAN, LAN in floor number 1, LAN in floor number 2. So all these will belong to corporate users. So all these 3 VLANs will be used by the corporate users inside the company. So you can add them as one single zone called corporate, and then you can allow them allow the resources to access from their side as a single policy. Okay, how do you create a zone? You could do it at the place where you're using it, or you could go to zones here and then create one for you already. So let me do it right away here. I'll say trust zone and IPv4, and I guess the PC is having 10.1.1.1, so the gateway for the PC is 10.1.1.10 and advanced. So there is one more thing that you got to take care is the management profile. So this is something that you need to configure for an interface. So to make sure what protocol or what services the port or IP address of the port will be accessed on. So like when I showed you management interface config yesterday, you had HTTPS, SSH, and ping already allowed to it. Similarly, you need to create a profile for the data interfaces here for you to allow the similar stuff for the data interfaces. So I'm allowing HTTPS, SSH, and ping. So similarly, you could create this outside at a place where you have this profile defined. That is under network profile, you have interface management here. I'll show you that. Or you can define it at the place where you're using it. So you have interface management. So you can go here and add one, like it's been already added. Or you could add it the place where you're using it on the interface tab. Similarly for zones. Okay, so Ethernet 1/1 is done. I'm yet to commit the changes, but let me configure 1/2 as well. So let me make it layer 3. And routing, virtual router is default. And the zone again, it should belong to untrust zone. So it shouldn't be a part of the same zone. So I'm keeping it in untrust zone and clicking OK. And IP address. So I know that I'm connected to management cloud 0. So I'm giving a DHCP. I'm enabling this as a DHCP client. And it's not a good idea to allow HTTPS, ping, and everything for the untrust interface. But then instead of creating one more security profile, I'm just allowing it as allowing it same as the inside interface. Okay, so the interface configs are complete. So let me commit the changes. So while it's getting committed, let me go to. Okay, I'll tell you one more thing. Since it's a DHCP client, this outside interface. So when I go for IPv4 and I choose DHCP client, it says automatically create a default route pointing to default gateway provided by the server. So the server is 172.16.24.1. And if I am getting an IP and if this option is enabled, I'm going to the firewall is going to create a default route pointing to the gateway automatically. So we don't need to take care of routing in this case. Okay. So let's directly go to policies. So I'm going to write a very simple policy here. So that says from trust zone to untrust zone. Okay, let me make the address as any for now and go to destination. The zone is untrust and destination address obviously any for internet. Maybe I'll allow DNS. I'll allow ping, and I will allow SSL for browsing. Okay, so services application default, which means whichever applications we have allowed, it's going to use the default port of it. Okay, DNS means 53, ping doesn't have a port, SSL 443. So the policy is done. So let's configure a NAT, simple NAT policy that's going to use the outside interface for NATing. So original packet will have trust zone, destination zone will be untrust. So rest I'm not going to touch. Let me keep it as any for simplicity. Let me go and configure the source address translation. So the source here will be translated to outside interface. So I'll say dynamic IP and port, which is PAT, and translated interface. And the interface will be Ethernet 1/2. I'll not be able to choose an IP here because it's dynamic. It's a DHCP, right? Okay, so security and NAT policy. For internet access. So once this guy is committed, or while this is getting committed, let me check if the previous commit is complete. Yeah, it is. So I'll quickly go ahead and show you how do you configure a packet capture, right? So where do you do it? You do it under monitor, packet capture. So here you could add filters where you could mention what's the source IP, destination IP, and so on and so forth. So let me just go to the Windows PC where I'll be initiating the traffic. So it's 10.1.1.1, right? So I'll go manage filters. I'll say 1, serial number, ID. So the interface will be Ethernet 1/1. So, or you could give any. In my case, I know what's the interface is. So it's 10.1.1.1. Destination, let's just test ICMP to 8.8. And rest, let me keep it as it is, as any. And the return traffic would be from 1/2. And it would be from 8.8 to, okay. So this is a filter I have defined. So you could define it, I think up to 4 or 5 filters to the max. So I'm defining 2 for ingress and egress traffic. So if you're troubleshooting something, you will be troubleshooting a specific flow, isn't it? So I'm just defining these 2 filters. So I have to switch on the filter. Okay, so now a filter is enabled. The filter that we have defined is enabled, and we have to stage what all we are going to capture. So I'll be capturing receive and transmit packets. And I'll be staging the transmit also. I know nothing is going to get dropped here, So I'm just going to stage these two. And let me try to initiate ping to 8.8. Before that, let me check if the commit is complete, or else the ping won't work. Right, commit is complete. Since we are capturing the traffic for anything from 10.1.1 towards 8.8, it's going to capture only our ping, because if I go ahead and browse something, it should work for me now. Okay, it isn't working. Okay, let's check what's the problem. So I have not enabled the capture yet. So let me check if I have got an IP. Yes. The interfaces are up, so no issues here. Let's check if I can ping the gateway. Yes, very well. So policies. Hit count is there. And security policy. So how am I able to ping the interface? Because I have given some something called interface management profile onto every interface that I've configured. So where I've allowed ping and HTTPS and all those stuff. Okay, let me try pinging 8.8 now. It works. So what would be the reason? It is probably not configured with DNS, right? So if I don't have DNS pushed to or configured on the PC, my name resolution won't work. So probably I haven't mentioned anything for DNS here. Okay, I did. Okay. Let me again go and try to go to internet. Let me just close this. Okay, it's resolving right now. I should be able to go to internet now, hopefully. not. Okay, let me first show you how the packet capture is done by pinging google.com. I think it's something to do with the browser. If I'm able to ping this guy and DNS is allowed, I should be able to go out. Let me try to check from Firefox. Okay, even Firefox fails. Okay, I'll be ping 8888 and switch on the capture. And when I refresh here, I should receive some packets that are getting captured, right? So if you feel that it's sufficient for testing, you could turn it off and download these files. And if you'd like to, you could merge and then check the traffic, or you will be able to review them separately. So I believe it's always good to merge so that you will be able to follow the flow. So how do you merge it? So you have to select the other file and you'll be able to merge. So the 10.1.1 sending the ICMP and reply from 8.8 towards the NATed IP of the firewall outside interface. Okay. So this is how you capture your packet on the firewall. So when you're done, it's always recommended and it is a must to disable the captures here and maybe clear the configs here if you don't want to use it again. Okay, so let me come back here and try to reload this PC and see if I can reach internet now. Meanwhile, let me check if I have allowed DNS on the policy.
I think you did not select from the policy. I observed you did not select permits.
No, it is by default permitted. If I'm not permitting, it will not be allowing me to ping as well, isn't it? I'm able to ping google.com. I'm able to ping 8.8, but I just that I can't browse. So the resolution happens fine because DNS is allowed. And when I tried pinging google.com, it was reachable. It was resolving the google.com to an IP and it was reachable. It is just some glitch. It should work now since I've reloaded it. I guess that's pretty much it. I think we have covered everything. Packet capture, config, audit, backup, restore, and administrator. Internet access should work in a bit. Let me see if the PC has come up. Yeah.
Hi, Navin.
Yeah.
Okay, I have quick question, please. So this pinging that you apply, right? Is it possible that you can do it under monitor traffic?
So you wanted to see the monitor tab?
Yep.
You want to check the logs, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, let me just show you that. I hope I will not be able to show you anything because I have just tried pinging something, and ping has an idle timeout of 1 second. So as soon as the ping is cancelled, I should not be able to see anything on the logs. So it will be timing out. So I am running a continuous ping now. And if I go back to the monitor, Traffic logs will be available only when you are equipped with the license of the firewall. For an unlicensed version, similar sort of stuff can be visible from the session browser. So let me just show you a quick thing on how do you filter things in the monitor tab. So wherever you go in the monitor tab, just a click will filter that specific parameter, and you'll be able to change the IP address of your choice. So whichever IP you got to filter and check, just click on the destination or source will filter that parameter for you. You don't have to type everything over again. Similarly for source, similarly for any parameter you may consider. So if I have to filter something on the source, let me click that, and I just can I'll be able to edit the IP address and I'll be able to filter. So here you see that okay, you see this? I finally at last I accessed something with respect to Google Chrome update or something. That's a page I tried accessing. So that is captured here. But you see the rule it is hitting, it's hitting interzone default. Maybe it is identifying the application as MS update. So it's a good thing to know, because the applications I have allowed is SSL and SSL, ping, and DNS, right? So when I tried going to google.com, the application that's identified is MS update. So that's what I was trying to say yesterday when I spoke about application ID. So it's going to identify the last application that you will be using on the user side. So first thing, it identified it to be SSL. Then it identified that to be MS update. So that's the reason why it wasn't working for us. And Google Base was another application it identified. So only one thing it identified was SSL, and that's getting hit on internet access rule that we have created. Others are getting hit to the interzone default. That's going to deny the traffic, right? So let me change the policy. So let me make it any. So there is one more thing you could do. Maybe I'll try doing that for you to know how it's done. So you are creating a rule and you don't know which application it'll hit. You don't know who's the team who's requesting that access. You don't know which application it'll hit, but you know the port. You know it's going to be 443, right? So what you do, you create an application rule, guessing what the application could be, and you clone that rule and create a service-based rule below that. So when you do that, you'll be able to identify. So keep the application as any right now on the second rule, and go to the service, and you say 443. Maybe I need to create one. Service HTTPS. So this will be 443. And maybe I create one for 53 for DNS. And click OK. So this will take care of any application that it identifies. If I keep application as any, whatever the application is, if the port is 443, it's going to allow the traffic. So it's not a secure way to do so, but then when you are able to make things working for the user, later on, you will be able to see which application it is on the logs there for this rule. And you can just add up the application onto the application rule that you've created above and then delete this one. So it's all about fine tuning. So when it is going to be a critical requirement for the user, it's the best way or easy way to first get things working for him, and then later on add the application that's getting identified by the firewall. So
okay,
right now,
well, excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Well, you are in policy and rules. So how we implement that? That should be like a standard, like if we have to apply standard policies and rules for all the branches network, so how we apply using a template those?
That's why you have a panorama for. So you have something called panorama. That's a centralized management server that manages multiple firewalls. Let's say you have 10 firewalls. And let's say you have a centralized DNS inbuilt, local DNS server of your corporate network. Similarly, a DHCP server, both are in data centers. So you have about 10 office firewalls, right? So
Yes.
all these firewalls, let's say for users coming from the corporate network, they should be coming from corporate zone. Let's say this is a standard for your company. So whatever VLAN he might be coming in from, the zone is corporate. Okay. So from corporate zone to going to DC, it will be a common zone for each and every office firewall, isn't it? So for corporate zone to maybe DC zone, DNS and DHCP. For this specific DC, DHCP and DNS server, you have to give an allow rule. But if you're not able to find a way to do so in a centralized manner, like you do in Panorama, you will have to create one rule for each firewall. Corporate to DC zone, DNS, DHCP allow, corporate to DC, DNS, DHCP allow. So you have to do 10 rules for 10 firewalls. Instead, you could use a feature called Panorama or a device called Panorama, where you group multiple firewalls. Let's say out of 10, 3 belong to Asia Pacific. 3 firewall belong to America, 3 belong to maybe Europe. So out of these 9 firewalls, you group 3 of them in APAC device group, 3 of them in America device group, 3 of in other region device group. And for this region, let's say you are allowing DNS and DHCP to go to data center 1. For these 2, you're allowing the DNS and DHCP to go to data center 2. So you could just go to the group that you have created and create a policy and push to all the 3 or 6 firewalls. So there's a way to do it. The concept is called device group and template on Panorama. So where you group multiple firewalls, first thing is to add the firewall to Panorama and make it connected to Panorama. Once it's connected, you create something called device group and template, and you create a group for each region, or depending on whatever is your architecture or your way of deploying things. You would create a group of firewalls and name it with a specific name of a group, and use that group to create a policy and push to all the devices in the group, all the firewalls in the group. So that's how you manage the policies or objects or network or device tab centralized. So basically, I told you about 2 terms: device group, that implies to policies and objects; template implies to network and devices. Okay, so we'll see that at the end of the session. So once we are done with all the concepts of Palo Alto, at last I have an idea to demonstrate Panorama for 2 hours. So we'll do that at last. So for now, you just try to understand on how do you configure security policies and how do you effectively allow things or deny things. So to do it in a centralized template manner, Panorama is the only way.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Now I'm committing the changes. So once this is done, I should see them working, because as you could see on the session browser, it was identifying it the traffic as a different application, and it's getting denied under interzone default. So there is one more thing that I got to mention. So under policies, you have 2 policies inbuilt. One being interzone and intrazone policy. So intrazone is by name, you understand that it's between same zone. So if the traffic is between 2 same zones, similar zones, source and destination, it's by default allowed. Unless and until you define as explicit rule to deny them, it's allowed by default. If it's between 2 different zones, it's denied by default. And there is a reason we are allowing it separately here. Okay, so these are the two rules, and it's getting hit on interzone default, because here earlier I have mentioned only 3 applications, which is not the application that it identifies for that specific traffic. So right now, once the commit is complete, I should be able to
Yeah, I get a quick one.
see then. I'm sorry, can you come again?
Okay, yeah, I get a quick one. Can you go back to the policy again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you the first one you put on internet access, where you put in the first one in the line 1. As long as I'm just curious to ask this, so I was thinking this filter the firewall filter the policy based on the precedence. So if that policy has allowed the what's it called, the internet access, then why is the intrazone blocking it?
No, it's not allowing, since it's not matching the exact application. So that's what I was trying to show you. So if earlier we were not having the second rule, right? Only the first rule was available. And in the first rule, I've allowed only 3 applications, DNS, ping, and SSL. But under session browser, for whatever I did on the Chrome on this PC, it was identifying the application to be Windows push notification or any other application for that matter. So it was not identifying it to be simple SSL application. So since I've allowed a simple SSL here, it was denying it and then hitting the intrazone default. So right now what I did was in the similar scenario in production, if you're not able to identify the application properly initially, you create a service rule. And you know that if I'm browsing something, it should be a HTTP 443 HTTPS or HTTP 80 on a browser. So it either should be 443 or 80. So you allow it based on the port number as a second rule below. And once the traffic is allowed through this SVC rule, it will also be letting you know what the application for that specific traffic is. So here you have allowed the traffic based on port number.
Oh, okay. You just use port number rather than
just to spot the application.
Okay.
So it will hit this rule now when I'm trying to access internet, and also it will say which application I'm going to hit. So with that, we'll be able to add up the application on the application rule and then delete this in future if you have identified what application it's hitting for the specific rule or for the specific traffic. Okay. So I think it is committed.
Simple SSL application identified as intrazone? Sorry. Why was it identified as just intrazones?
It was not identified as intrazone. SSL was not identified as intrazone. I told you that initially when you browse something, it's SSL. But when depending on which application you're accessing, let's say you're browsing Facebook here. So initially this one is SSL. But when you get inside, it's identified as Facebook. So that's what has happened here. So initially I have allowed SSL, but when I browse something, the initial application is SSL, but at the end of the session, it's getting identified as some other application. And let me show you something more. Let me go to actions here. I'm logging the session only at the end. So I'm not logging it at the start. So if I'm logging both, it will show me that, okay, first I'm accessing SSL, then it changes to Facebook, then it changes to Facebook chat, and so on and so forth. So I'm not doing this because it's going to overload the firewall. So it's always a better idea to log the session only at the end. Since I'm logging it at the end, I will only be seeing the end application. So what's the last application that the user will be going in for that specific traffic or session. Okay. So since it's SSL in the beginning and some other application when it finishes the session, it was denied and it goes and hits to this rule. So that's for that reason I'm allowing a service-based rule, and I'm trying to access the internet now. It should work, hopefully.
Yeah, that's my question. Like, why only intrazone? It could have gotten into the interzone also, right?
Interzone is same zone. If you see, interzone is not, sorry, it's not intrazone, it's interzone.
Yeah, it was hitting interzone, I believe.
Interzone means
between zones.
two different zones. Intra-zone is between two zones. So if I have two machines here, and if they both are communicating, it belongs to same zone called trust. So
Yeah,
that is
so-
intra-zone.
So it was hitting the interzone, not the intrazone. Yeah.
No, it's not hitting the intra, it's hitting interzone. So
Interzone, correct.
yeah. So right now it goes to reach internet for DNS. It hits now the internet access SVC, you see, Google for Google base.
Got it.
So now you know that the application is Google base, and you may probably go and add Google base to the application based rule and slowly keep adding the application. And once you know that everything works fine, you can just maybe delete this rule in future.
So for example, if it was like, if this is the case, then any HTTPS application, any browser will start as a HTTPS application. Would that be able to identify all the end applications in this manner if we
Yeah, if it
add a service policy?
if the firewall, yeah, it will be able to. So that's what I was about to show you next. So here is a hit count of that rule. How many hit counts are there? And if I go and see what's the last hit, what's the first hit, application seen, I should see something that says, yeah, app seen. So this should give me what applications are seen here. But it's not showing up anything. Let me refresh again. Okay, maybe it does. It needs a signature. It needs a certificate, I believe. For some reason, it doesn't show here. But usually, in production, it will show you what application is seen on a service-based rule too. On this section. So if you just click in,
That's
it will
the
be
app
showing.
ID feature, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it will show you what applications that are getting hit for this service-based rule, even though you have allowed a service port and any application, it will tell you which application it has hit. So let's say you have allowed 10 applications to this application rule, and the applications that are seen on this rule are only 4, and you know that only 4 applications are seen, but you have allowed 10, so you can maybe delete the remaining 6. Okay. Okay. I believe that's all I wanted to show you. Again, let me put up the registration URL for you guys to register if you haven't done already. So I hope you have found this helpful, and you got to know how the class would look like for rest of the topics that we are going to cover. So let me just go back to.
So is this class going to happen every 7 p.m. IST?
That's right. Yes, that's correct.
On Saturdays and Sundays.
That's correct. Okay, you could probably save this one and contact our backend team in case of any registration help or any help after registering to the session as well. So any further questions for me before we wind up the session?
So when is the next class?
It should be from next week. I think we have already covered up 4 hours of session. So I'll just be taking a audit on whomever is a part of the batch from next week. And if everyone have attended the demo, I'll be continuing with the rest of the topics. Else I'll have to repeat this. So if anyone is joining in the course of this next 1 week, and if they're not part of this demo, and if I'll have to repeat the same concept again, I'll do so, or else we'll be moving forward. Yeah, it'll start from next week. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, guys. Any questions for me before we drop off?
Yeah, at the same time next week.
Yeah, it will be next week, same time. It's going to be 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay, is it possible we get the video or probably the recording for the class?
It will be available. You will be emailed. So I think you used your email address to register for this demo. So you will
Yes,
get
I
an
did.
email with regards to the demo session that happened today and yesterday. And after you have enrolled to the classes, you will also be getting the recorded videos of it in your portal. So you'll be getting a portal access. You should be having all those videos uploaded in the portal, and you can log in and view them as you want whenever you need it.
Okay. When is the next class, please?
It will be next week, the same time, next Saturday.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. If I don't have any further questions, I'll let you contact the backend team for any further clarifications regarding your enrollment. I hope to see you all there in the class next week. Until then, take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Navin.
Yeah, bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you, Navin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye.